Welcome to another deep dive.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got an incredibly dense, almost overwhelming stack of sources today, but it is absolutely vital.
Oh, it is.
We are diving right into the heart of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Not just the battlefield, but the intense, high-stakes, almost dizzying diplomacy swirling around it right now. And, the pressure is immense.
This deep dive is crucial because the information stack we have here, ranging from detailed Ukrainian investigative journalism to Western think tanks and deep dive policy papers, it all reveals that Kyiv is facing what President Zelenskyy himself called one of the most difficult moments.
That phrase alone carries so much weight.
Exactly. He is navigating what feels like an impossible choice. The potential loss of a key partner, and we know who that key partner is, the United States, versus what he terms the loss of dignity.
The loss of dignity, wow.
And when you analyze the source material, you realize that this is not hyperbole. It is a strategic calculation based on crippling domestic vulnerabilities, diplomatic isolation, and a financial clock that is just ticking down fast. I mean, that is heavy. That's the definition of a high-stakes moment. And we have to thank the person who sent in this fantastic, detailed, well-researched stack, Expert Trader UK.
Absolutely. Great work.
They clearly understand that to truly grasp this moment, you need to connect the dots between the shifting military realities, the diplomatic chaos, and, crucially, that deep, painful financial squeeze Ukraine is currently experiencing.
Absolutely. So let's unpack this. The core issue, the epicenter of this pressure cooker, is a highly controversial, U.S. brokered, get this, a 28-point peace plan.
28 points.
28 points. And many in Ukraine are already branding this framework as capitulation and betrayal.
I can see why.
So our mission here is to go through what this detailed plan proposes, why it landed right now at the moment of maximum Ukrainian vulnerability, and how it directly connects to military aid reviews and Europe's financial indecision.
28 points. We need to move fast, but we need to go deep on every single one of those pressure points.
Okay, let's jump in.
Let's do it. Okay. Let's start with the genesis of this document, and immediately we hit confusing political signals, which is pretty typical of high-stakes, opaque diplomacy.
It really is. The plan was reportedly brokered by U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev.
Right.
Yes, and the confusion starts right there because we have these totally contradictory narratives coming out of Washington.
How so?
U.S. officials claim, and this is the official State Department line, that the document was authored by the United States with input from both sides.
Okay, so the U.S. is taking ownership.
Publicly, yes. But here's the critical source contradiction. We have reports that U.S. senators, specifically King and Shaheen, were briefed by Secretary of State Rubio that the document was actually a wish list of the Russians.
Wait a minute. So the State Department is telling the public one thing, but the Secretary of State is telling lawmakers in private the complete opposite.
That's what the sources allege. If the U.S. is claiming authorship, but its own Secretary of State is briefing lawmakers that it's essentially a Russian wish list, that isn't just a disconnect.
No, that sounds like intentional misdirection to manage domestic political fallout. Is the source material suggesting that the U.S. is primarily acting as a delivery mechanism for Moscow's demands?
That is precisely the implication. And Senator Rounds, a Republican, added fuel to that fire, saying the document looked more like it was written in Russian to begin with.
Wow.
Now, the State Department spokesman, Tommy Pigott, he quickly countered, calling the senator's account blatantly false, but the core tension remains.
Of course. The damage is done.
Right. Whether it was authored by the U.S. or merely facilitated by them, the content is designed to offer maximum leverage to Moscow.
Okay, let's unpack the specifics, because this is where the real pain for Kyiv begins, and why Zelenskyy warned of losing dignity. The source material, titled New U.S. Peace Plan Pushes Ukraine Toward Capitulation, outlines some devastating territorial cessions.
Right. Let's start with the hardest line, territory. The plan calls for Ukraine to cede the Donbas region entirely.
The entire region.
The entire thing. This requires the full unilateral withdrawal of Ukrainian forces from Donetsk Oblast. And the strategic context here is crucial.
Lay it out for us.
As of late 2025, after nearly 4 years of full-scale fighting, Russia controls only about 67% to 69% of Donetsk.
Right. They've been stuck for a long time.
They took an additional 1/3 of that oblast in 4 years of brutal warfare. But now they are demanding Kyiv hand over the remaining 30% that they have repeatedly failed to take militarily.
So they're demanding victory through diplomacy where their army has failed on the battlefield. That is incredible audacity. But it doesn't stop there, does it? What about the other occupied regions?
No, it certainly does not stop there. The plan proposes that the United States grant de facto recognition of Russian control over Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk.
De facto, so not official, but...
But in practice, yes, a recognition that it's Russian territory now. And for the critical southern regions, Kherson and Zaporizhia, the lines would be frozen along the current line of contact.
Which also means de facto recognition of Russia's control over huge parts of those oblasts.
Exactly. This is a direct violation of Kyiv's core principle, the restoration of its 1991 borders. Lawmakers from the Congressional Ukraine Caucus have been explicit on this, saying any framework requiring Ukraine to surrender further territory is completely unacceptable.
Okay, that's the territory. That's brutal enough. Now, let's look at what the sources call the security paradox. Handcuffing Ukraine's future defense capability while forcing it to live next door to an expansionist state.
The paradox is brutal. The plan proposes limiting the size of the Ukrainian armed forces to 600,000 personnel.
600,000.
Yeah.
And they're currently at what?
Currently, Ukraine's estimated forces are around 800,000 to 850,000. So this is effectively demanding a mandatory immediate reduction of roughly 25% of their fighting capacity.
A 25% cut while simultaneously formalizing the loss of all that territory.
Yes, it's just tying one hand behind their back.
But the threat isn't just the reduction in numbers. It's the long-term strategic neutering. They are also demanding a permanent NATO bloc. Right.
Correct. The plan suggests Ukraine must agree to enshrine in its constitution that it will never join NATO.
Never.
And, equally problematic, NATO itself must agree to a provision barring Ukraine's future admission. This essentially grants Russia a permanent strategic security veto over Ukraine, formalizing the core grievance Putin used to justify the initial invasion.
I remember that quote from the Ukrainian official in the sources. It was something like, "No promises will protect us from the army of another state. Only our own army can do that."
Yes.
That just encapsulates their strategic reality.
Yeah.
They see these limits not as security guarantees, but as a strategic invitation for Russia to come back and finish the job whenever it feels ready.
Exactly. They made the same mistake in 1994, giving up their massive nuclear arsenal in exchange for guarantees under the Budapest Memorandum.
Which Russia then shredded.
Shredded. Violated first in 2014 and then catastrophically in 2022. For them, sacrificing their force size and NATO accession for some vague diplomatic assurances is simply unacceptable historical repetition. It's a non-starter.
Okay, let's get into the most cynical and toxic provisions. The cultural and legal clauses. This is where the plan moves from strategic demands to what feels like narrative warfare.
This is where it gets deeply problematic and has sparked the most emotional outrage in Kyiv.
I can imagine.
The plan originally proposed an audit of international aid, which is already insulting enough, but the truly shocking element was the reported offer of full amnesty for actions during the war to all parties involved.
Oh, wow. Amnesty for all. That means war crimes accountability goes right out the window.
That is the fear. Ukrainian activists and legal scholars immediately viewed discussing amnesty for alleged Russian atrocities in places like Mariupol, Bucha, and Irpin as betraying the interest of Ukrainians.
Of course.
The Ukrainian World Congress was quick to state that accountability and reparations for illegal destruction are completely non-negotiable. This amnesty clause, if accepted, undermines the entire global effort to hold Russia responsible under international law.
It just erases everything. And then there is the provision designed to legitimize Russia's false pretext for the war, the infamous denazification narrative.
Yes, this one is. It's just poison. A provision calls for the abolition of all discriminatory measures and a guarantee of the rights of Ukrainian and Russian media and education.
Which sounds benign on the surface.
Exactly. But the inflammatory kicker is the mandate that all Nazi ideology and activity must be rejected and prohibited.
This is the tactical demand designed to force Ukraine to validate the very pretext used for their destruction, isn't it? It's forcing them to admit they had a Nazi problem.
It is pure narrative warfare embedded in a formal peace proposal. By forcing Kyiv to sign off on a clause that explicitly targets Nazi ideology, Zelenskyy would be domestically validating Putin's central false claim of denazification.
It's strategically toxic.
It is. It turns the victim into an accomplice, and the source material confirms that far-right political support in Ukraine remains negligible, around 2% in the 2019 election. This clause is purely a psychological and political weapon.
So we have maximalist territorial demands, security neutering, and a mandate to legitimize the aggressor's narrative. How did Europe react when this U.S. brokered plan surfaced? They weren't involved in the negotiation, were they?
No, they were not, and they pushed back hard.
Good.
European leaders were quick to affirm robust support for Kyiv and explicitly stated that any attempt to end the war must involve Ukraine and Europe directly. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas highlighted the fundamental asymmetry here.
What was that?
She said Russia could have agreed to an unconditional ceasefire long ago if they genuinely wanted peace. The fact they didn't proves these are not peace terms, but surrender terms.
And this leads us to those scary historical parallels that analysts keep referencing.
Absolutely. Analysts and lawmakers are drawing direct parallels to historical failures of appeasement. The most immediate one is the disastrous Minsk agreements of 2014.
Right, which just kicked the can down the road.
It did worse than that. It merely froze the conflict along impossible lines, allowing Russia to regroup, rearm, and launch a full-scale invasion later.
And the more chilling parallel, the one that everyone is really afraid of.
The Munich Agreement of 1938, where Czechoslovakia was pressured by France and Britain to cede the Sudetenland to Nazi Germany. History views that as a historic failed act of appeasement.
The ultimate cautionary tale.
It is. And the message analysts are sending to Kyiv is clear. Appeasing an aggressor does not end a conflict. It only guarantees the next, more violent phase of expansion after the aggressor has had time to consolidate.
So the pressure on Zelenskyy to reject this is not just political. It's informed by the darkest lessons of the 20th century.
Exactly right.
Okay, that sets the stage for the plan itself. Now let's talk about the timing.
If the 28-point plan is the diplomatic bomb, the timing of its release is the critical fuse. This peace push landed precisely when Kyiv is most exposed, creating maximum leverage for the negotiators.
A perfect storm.
Perfect storm. It's a convergence of external military strain and severe internal political weakness.
Let's start with pressure point one, the political and corruption crisis. We have reports of the biggest scandal of Zelenskyy's presidency landing right alongside this diplomatic effort.
That's right. The controversy is unfolding amid the largest corruption scandal, this one involving kickbacks for contracts with the state-owned nuclear energy company.
Nuclear energy, that's a sensitive sector.
Very. And this involved significant financial misconduct, which led to the resignations of top cabinet ministers in the energy and justice sectors. For any government, that's a crisis. For a government fighting an existential war, it is debilitating.
And political economist Konstantin Sonin had a key observation about how this turmoil is immediately leveraged, didn't he?
He did. Sonin noted that, and I'm quoting here, Donald Trump, the key player influencing the U.S. position, is extremely good at spotting weak spots of people, and this political turmoil provides an instant, powerful lever.
So the internal chaos in Kyiv makes the government look unstable, unreliable.
Unreliable to Western partners, exactly. It increases the perceived need for a quick resolution, any resolution, just to stabilize things.
And that domestic vulnerability is directly exploited by one element of the 28-point plan we mentioned, the demand for elections.
Precisely. The plan dictates that elections must be held within 100 days of the agreement's enactment.
100 days.
This is a direct attack on Ukraine's sovereignty, as the country is currently operating under martial law, which constitutionally prohibits wartime elections.
So it's an impossible demand.
It's designed to be. Forcing an election during this moment of scandal and strategic vulnerability is designed to destabilize Zelenskyy's government, possibly resulting in its collapse or replacement by a more pliable administration willing to accept these territorial losses.
So it's a clear strategy. Pressure him on territory, reduce his defenses, and force a high-stakes, destabilizing domestic election. It's a multifaceted assault on sovereignty.
Now, let's layer on pressure point two. Battlefield strain and infrastructure attacks. This is the urgency factor.
The physical pressure.
Yes. Russia is systematically pounding Ukraine's energy infrastructure ahead of winter. We're talking widespread, rolling blackouts nationwide. The sources are explicit. This escalating energy situation creates immense urgency for peace talks.
Because the alternative is millions of people freezing in the dark.
Exactly. Millions of people without power and heat during freezing temperatures.
And the scale of destruction is almost impossible to grasp. We have hard data from the KSE Institute. We should clarify for you, the listener. KSE is the Kyiv School of Economics, and they have been meticulously tracking damages. What do those numbers tell us?
The KSE Institute's assessment as of November 2024 shows total cumulative damages to infrastructure reach nearly $170 billion.
$170 billion. For context, what was Ukraine's pre-war GDP?
It was around $179 billion.
So they have destroyed nearly an entire year's worth of GDP and infrastructure.
That's right. The housing sector suffered the most, $60 billion, with 236,000 residential buildings damaged or destroyed. That level of destruction creates a massive psychological weight, making the option of a ceasefire, even a humiliating one, appealing to a shell-shocked population facing a cold, dark winter.
Right. It's weaponizing winter. It's an old Russian tactic.
A very old tactic.
Okay, now let's look at pressure point 3. Public sentiment and diplomatic isolation. How are Ukrainians processing this flood of pressure from their Western partners?
They are deeply worried. And we have recent poll results to back this up from KIES, the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. Their data shows a significant, alarming shift in public trust. The number of Ukrainians who believe the U.S. is pressuring them to accept an unjust peace raised dramatically.
How much?
It went from 38% in August to 52% in October of 2025.
That's a majority. A majority of the population now feel their main military backer is actively working against their stated war aims. That is an enormous psychological blow.
It is, and the sentiment that Europe's support is weakening also increased, rising from 27% in August to 38%.
So trust is eroding across the board.
It is. While Europe is still trusted more than the U.S., the trend is negative. This erosion of public confidence is why Zelensky's comment that the choice is either the loss of dignity or the risk of losing a key partner resonates so deeply. He is reflecting the domestic reality that he is being squeezed by his own allies.
This confirms that the U.S. brokered plan is landing at the absolute worst possible moment for Kyiv, designed to maximize pain and leverage.
It's textbook power politics.
We shift now from diplomatic ultimatums to the absolute financial reality. Ukraine is running on fumes, and the most logical, elegant solution, using frozen Russian funds, is completely stuck in a European legal and bureaucratic maze. It's the money maze.
And the numbers involved are just staggering. Around $300 billion of Russian central bank assets were frozen by Western countries.
$300 billion.
But the key concentration point, the big prize, is approximately $140 billion. That's about $150 billion U.S. held primarily at the Belgian depository, Euroclear.
We need to pause there for a second and explain why Euroclear, a Belgian financial institution, is holding so much of Russia's sovereign cash. Why Belgium?
It's purely a function of financial infrastructure. Euroclear is one of the world's largest central securities depositories.
It's like a central bank for banks.
In a way, yes. Large global financial transactions, especially those involving bonds and securities, often flow through its systems. So when the assets were frozen in 2022, they were essentially trapped where the transactions settled in Belgium.
Which means Belgian law, and by extension the Belgian government's political stance, is central to unlocking this money.
Precisely. They hold the keys to the kingdom, so to speak.
Okay, so that's the source of the cash. Why is the need so urgent? Let's recap Ukraine's financial black hole.
The total cost of the war is estimated at a staggering $120 billion per year.
Per year?
Yes. Ukraine's internal budget covers about $60 billion of that. That leaves a massive unmet deficit of $60 billion for next year, 2026. Without an immediate, massive financial injection, the state faces collapse, regardless of military aid.
You can have all the tanks in the world, but if you can't pay your soldiers or your teachers, the state ceases to function.
Exactly.
And the proposed solution everyone is debating is not using the interest, which is only, about $5.6 billion a year?
A drop in the bucket.
Right. The solution is to use the principal itself via a reparations loan.
That's the critical difference. The proposed solution is to issue a loan, likely backed by the G7 nations, that is collateralized by the $140 billion principal amount itself.
So you're borrowing against the frozen money.
That's it. This loan is intended to cover most of the budget deficit over the next 2 years. It would provide approximately $40 billion toward budget stability, with the remaining potential loan capacity of $100 billion going toward immediate military and reconstruction needs. This is the scale of assistance that's necessary.
Okay, so the need is $60 billion, the resource is $140 billion. What is the blocking factor? If the need is so desperate, why is Belgium saying no?
Well, the official line from Belgium is legal caution. They refuse to approve the scheme primarily because they fear it would damage the international reputation of their financial institutions.
How so?
If the West essentially confiscates sovereign assets, even aggressor state assets, it could scare away capital from emerging markets who hold funds in European depositories.
Ah, so other countries might think if they did it to Russia, they could do it to us and pull their money out.
That's the fear, that they would seek safer havens outside the Eurozone.
But the bigger issue, according to the sources, is the legal risk associated with reimbursement, right? The liability.
Yes, that's the joint liability dispute. Belgium is deeply concerned about how EU countries would share the risk if, years down the line, a major legal ruling, perhaps from the European Court of Justice, decides that the assets must be reimbursed to Russia.
As part of some final peace settlement or something?
Exactly. Or a legal challenge. No single country wants to be left holding the liability bag for the entire $140 billion. The negotiation is stuck on the mechanism of risk sharing.
Ah, I see. It's a classic insurance problem, where institutional stability and complex legal risk management are prioritized over immediate humanitarian and military aid.
And this legal caution masks what sources call a more uncomfortable truth.
Which is?
That some key EU leaders may no longer believe Ukraine can win and are quietly hedging its bets.
Hedging their bets.
Wow. They see the risk of potentially having to return the $140 billion as too high if the war ends in a stalemate or a forced concession that leaves Russia with diplomatic leverage. Hedging means keeping their legal options open.
Which unfortunately means leaving Ukraine financially starved.
That's the practical consequence.
Quietly hedging its bets. That speaks volumes about the diplomatic fatigue and skepticism. Are we talking about specific countries here or just a general European mindset?
While Germany and France are often cited as the most cautious regarding setting dangerous legal precedents for sovereign assets, the sources indicate that the resistance is widespread within the bureaucracy that manages the financial risk framework.
So it's the system itself that's cautious.
Very much so. For example, they are looking at precedents set by asset freezes in places like Iran and Afghanistan, where the legal outcomes were highly complex and sometimes demanded repayment. They fear setting a standard that could destabilize global trust in the euro as a reserve currency.
And what is the actual tangible consequence if this reparations loan fails to materialize soon?
The consequence is catastrophic. If the reparations loan fails, the sources warn that the IMF will likely postpone issuing a new $8 billion loan to Ukraine.
Why?
Because securing the reparations loan is seen as a prerequisite for convincing the IMF of Ukraine's financial viability in the medium term. This failure, the dual failure of the reparations loan and the IMF loan, would push Kyiv toward a serious financial crisis by early next year, 2026.
So a state that cannot fund its basic civil administration, its pensions, and its services.
Cannot effectively run a modern war. It's that simple.
A serious financial crisis in 2026, coinciding exactly with the maximum diplomatic pressure to accept territorial concessions. It is an impossible situation driven by legal paralysis and geopolitical risk aversion.
It truly is.
Okay, this brings us to the military reality. The financial and diplomatic pressure is compounded by changes in military support, particularly from the U.S., which has historically been Ukraine's largest military backer.
Yes, and the U.S. aid shift is a political weapon being used to amplify that diplomatic push.
Let's define the scale of U.S. support first, just to set the baseline.
Since 2022, the U.S. has provided over $66.5 billion in military aid. That's part of about $180 billion in total assistance.
A huge number.
Massive. But now, the current administration has explicitly stated it is pausing and reviewing new aid until Ukraine demonstrates a tangible commitment to peace talks based on that 28-point plan framework.
So the aid is now a lever. It's conditional.
It's pure leverage.
The cessation of new aid is a major blow because U.S. supplies, around 20% of all supplies, include critical advanced systems. We all know about HIMARS and Patriot, but what about the vital soft support that is often overlooked?
That soft support is often the decisive factor. It includes systems like satellite communications, think Starlink, and most critically, intelligence data and targeting information.
The eyes and ears of the war.
Exactly. If the U.S. stops sharing high-fidelity satellite data and real-time intelligence on Russian troop movements and deep logistics, it would severely degrade Ukraine's ability to conduct long-range precision strikes and defense planning.
And Europe can't just step in and provide that.
Europe simply lacks the scale and capabilities to fill this specific intelligence gap. It's a loss of a critical enabler that they can't easily replace.
Okay, but this is where the pipeline paradox comes into play, a truly fascinating point from the source material. While new funding is depleted, equipment will continue to flow for years from previously committed funds.
Yes, and we need to be crystal clear for you, the listener, on the two different types of aid mechanisms here. Drawdowns versus USAI.
Explain the difference.
Drawdowns are equipment taken directly from existing U.S. military stocks, think immediate transfer. The lead time is relatively short, averaging about 8 months from announcement to delivery. That pool, the drawdown pool, is now largely depleted.
Okay, so that's the fast stuff. And the second mechanism.
That is USAI, the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. This involves the U.S. government signing contracts to procure new equipment directly from defense manufacturers.
Ah, so it has to be built first.
Exactly, and this is where the long timeline comes in. A USAI contract involves about 4 months for the contract award, 24 months for initial production, and potentially another 20 months for full delivery and training integration. We are looking at lead times that often exceed 48 months for complex systems.
4 years.
For things like new Patriot interceptors or NASAMS units, yes.
Ah, that explains the paradox. The equipment ordered in the initial surge of 2022, which takes 2 to 4 years to manufacture, is only now starting to arrive in bulk.
Exactly. The USAI contracts from 2022, including a dozen HIMARS and a dozen NASAMS air defense systems, are beginning to deliver throughout 2025 and well into 2026.
So, ironically, the actual dollar value of U.S. deliveries might go up this year.
That's what the projections show. Absent political interference, U.S. deliveries in 2025 are projected to be substantially more in dollar value than they were in 2024. Potentially rising from around $500 million to $920 million per month.
So the good news is the heavy equipment pipeline is full and flowing, but the bad news is the political threat, right? Could the U.S. administration stop this contracted equipment from reaching Ukraine?
That political threat hangs over the entire delivery schedule, and yes, legally they could.
How?
An administration hostile to continued aid could invoke emergency authorities, specifically Title I of the Defense Production Act, the DPA.
And what does that do?
This act allows the president to redirect essential materials and manufactured goods for U.S. national defense purposes. Theoretically, the administration could divert USAI deliveries, even equipment legally belonging to Ukraine via contract to replenish U.S. forces.
So they could just take it.
They could, effectively starving Ukraine of the incoming heavy gear. This threat provides powerful ongoing leverage in the peace talks.
So the money is frozen and the military aid is flowing, but under immediate political threat. How is Europe responding to filling this gap, especially since their own defense industry is noted as being in a deteriorated state?
Europe has been trying hard. European military aid has been comparable to the U.S. on a monthly basis, averaging around $1.8 billion per month.
That's a lot.
It is. The Kiel Institute data, which is the authoritative tracker of aid commitments, shows a huge surge earlier this year. In a single 2-month period, they committed the highest combined total since the war started. $10.4 billion in military aid and $9.8 billion in financial and humanitarian aid.
So that surge largely fills the U.S. aid withdrawal, as the source says.
For now, yes. It's an impressive fiscal and industrial response from Europe.
But there's a catch.
There's always a catch. The analysts qualify this surge. Europe is supplying as much as it can given the deteriorated state of their defense industry. The problem is not necessarily financial commitment, but industrial capacity.
They just can't make stuff fast enough.
They're running up against the limits of their long-term ability to manufacture complex ammunition, shells, and advanced air defense systems at the necessary scale to replace the U.S. long-term commitment.
Finally, let's turn to the front lines. The CSIS analysis, that's the Center for Strategic and International Studies. It outlines Russia's overlapping asymmetric advantages. This suggests a significant and alarming shift in the military reality on the ground.
Yes. For the first time in the war, the sources confirm that the advantages are overlapping in favor of Moscow, lining up the holes in the Swiss cheese.
The holes in the Swiss cheese, I like that. It means weaknesses in multiple areas are now compounding.
Exactly. It's not just one problem, it's several problems happening at once.
Let's break down those advantages, starting with drone technology, which has really defined this conflict.
Well, the assessment is that Russia is now judged to marginally outstrip Ukraine in drone innovation, shifting the balance of tactical superiority.
How? I thought Ukraine was the king of drone innovation.
They were. But Russia has achieved greater standardization in production, unlike Ukraine, which relies on dozens of different models built by decentralized volunteer groups. And crucially, Russia was the first mover in widely fielding fiber optic controlled drones.
Fiber optic, how does that work?
These drones are connected to the operator by a fine fiber wire that makes them impervious to electronic warfare, to jamming.
Oh.
And that gives them superior, continuous, high-definition imagery for artillery targeting. It makes their fires more accurate and much more resilient.
So if you can't jam the drone, you can't stop the artillery from hitting the target. That's a massive problem. What about tactical adaptation? Ukraine was initially praised for its agility.
That initial Ukrainian lead has been lost. The sources suggest Russia is now probably better, marginally, in tactical adaptation.
Better how?
They are systematically sharing lessons across the front, from battalion to battalion, much more efficiently than they did in 2022. This systematic learning, combined with improved fires, particularly those long-range glide bombs with improved guidance and EW resilience, means their attacks are becoming more sophisticated and harder to counter.
So Russia has learned to learn better.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And then there are the fundamental, structural, unchangeable facts of scale: manpower and economic might.
This is the ultimate attrition factor. Russia has a massive numerical superiority with a population of 145 million versus Ukraine's roughly 38 million.
It's just a numbers game at that point.
It is. And economically, a much larger GDP, $2021 billion versus $179 billion. Russia's war effort is also buttressed by huge injections of North Korean munitions and significant covert support from China.
So while Ukraine retains motivation and interior lines of defense,
the structural advantages, economic and demographic, are stacking up for Moscow in a long war of attrition.
That paints a picture of extreme, multifaceted pressure from all angles. Diplomatic concessions demanded, financial resources locked away, and Russia gaining a marginal but definite advantage on the front lines through improved tactics and sheer scale.
It's an incredibly bleak picture.
So what does this all mean? We have a diplomatic push forcing territorial concessions, security neutering, and political interference. A 28-point plan viewed by many as a Russian wish list.
Right.
This is happening precisely when Ukraine is politically fragile, dealing with a massive corruption scandal, and facing a crippling financial crunch because Europe is slow-walking $140 billion in frozen Russian assets over a legal liability dispute.
It's the perfect storm we talked about. The sources confirm that Ukraine is fighting desperately for its existential survival, while Russia, sensing weakness and exploiting that political fragility, has developed overlapping tactical and strategic advantages for the first time in the war.
And the analysts add another layer, don't they? That Russia cannot afford to lose.
Right. They can't afford to lose and survive politically, given the historical fear of veterans returning from unwon wars causing political instability. This mutual existential commitment makes the diplomatic options that much harder.
So the key question for you, the listener, is this. Given this impossible dilemma, facing the loss of dignity, accepting territorial concessions, versus the risk of losing a key partner defying the U.S. peace framework, can Ukraine successfully counteroffer this problematic peace plan and maintain Western support without conceding its sovereignty?
It's a huge question.
And history, from Minsk to Munich, clearly shows that sovereignty concessions are a recipe for disaster. It's a question of pure strategic survival now.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought, because the timeline is everything here. We noted that the Russian state rearmament plan puts in place an ultimate capability objective,
Which is?
being fully ready for a war with NATO by 2030.
Right. They need time to rebuild and rearm after this.
So, if Ukraine is pressured to freeze the conflict now, along current lines of contact, does that simply give Moscow the critical pause it needs?
A Minsk playbook all over again.
Exactly. As one Ukrainian lawmaker feared, would freezing the conflict allow Russia to recover and approach the next phase of the war with much greater strength and resources in 5 years' time? Does a forced, frozen conflict merely serve as a strategic pause for Moscow to prepare for its grander aims against the West?
That is a chilling thought to end on. That was quite the deep dive today. Thank you again to Expert Trader UK for providing this critical source material. It was absolutely essential for understanding the true nature of the pressure Kyiv is facing.
A lot of ground covered, but necessary detail. Absolutely.
See you on the next one. Same time, same place.